Hi!
Over the years, Marvel has introduced many legendary characters: Iron Man, Captain America, the Incredible Hulk. However, none have really swung into success quite like the Amazing Spider-Man. One of the most beloved origin stories in comic book history is Peter Parker's metamorphosis into the web-slinging wall crawler following a bite from a radioactive spider. With that love came video games, movies, and animated shows that have kept Spider-Man in the public eye for decades. And since the 1960s, every generation has enjoyed a Spider-Man animation, each one putting its own creative spin on the character and story. Early in the 1980s, when the company was riding high on the success of its comic book heroes, the idea to bring these characters onto TV screens resulted in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Connected to the 1981 Spider-Man series, this show was created to expand the superhero crowd by serving a team-centric, breezy spin on Spider-Man's universe. The animated series blended our old favorites with new characters to form a dynamic trio of Spider-Man, Firestar, and Iceman who tackled everything from mutants to everyday crooks, all while keeping New York City and the globe out of harm's way. So, in this marvelous video, let's join Spider-Man and his amazing friends as they venture into this silly but entertaining world. Before we get too deep into things, we have a very small request, however. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Electrical juice?
The creation of Spider-Man and his amazing friends. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, DC superheroes were all over the place. On TV, in movies, and their posters were in every department store across America. In the meantime, people didn't really recognize nearly as many Marvel characters. When NBC saw the popularity of ABC's Super Friends, they thought to themselves, why not us? And things began to shift. The network launched its own superhero series. They debuted with a trio of hits: The Kids' Superpower Hour with Shazam, Space Stars, and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. While the first two fizzled out quickly, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was a Saturday morning smash from 1982 to 86. Marvel Productions' most famous hero, Peter Parker, would co-star with ex-X-Man Bobby Drake, who played Iceman, and Angelica Jones, a mutant named Firestar, in the series. When not superheroing, the trio were students at Empire State University and lived with Peter's Aunt May and her dog, Ms. Lion. While Angelica has her own quarters, Peter and Bobby shared a room that changed into a state-of-the-art superhero base with a turn of a bust on the mantelpiece. It doesn't really fit into the budget of the three students, but it was actually a thank you gift from none other than Tony Stark. After teaming up to foil one of the Beatles' plots, the trio decides to shake on it and name themselves the Spider-Friends. The Spider-Friends team up to defend New York and the world from a slew of villains, each with their own special powers. At first, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends was going to have Iceman and the Fantastic Four's Human Torch team up. However, since the Torch was already involved in another licensing contract, Marvel decided to produce a new character named Firestar to replace the Torch. Firestar, like Iceman, was a mutant and quickly rose to prominence, becoming a staple in the Marvel Universe. Spider-Man and his allies called themselves the Spider-Friends and rallied with the battle cry, "Spider-Friends, go for it!" as a playful homage to DC's Super Friends, because why not? The show briefly ran for 3 seasons on NBC Saturday mornings and ended in 1986. 13 episodes made up the first season, and they included the original Spider-Man, Firestar, and Iceman, and it was pure nostalgia, baby. Season 2 had only 3 new episodes, which were included in the show, titled The Incredible Hulk and The Amazing Spider-Man. Toei Doga animated this season and gave the characters a taller, more heroic appearance. Also, Stan Lee's iconic narrations were introduced. Beginning in 1983, 8 new episodes made up the third and final season. The title was changed to The Amazing Spider-Man and The Incredible Hulk, and the episodes were an hour long and featured both new and rerun episodes of Hulk with episodes of Spider-Man. The animation crew from Season 1 was back for this grand finale, tying up the series with the same enthusiasm and flair that had made the show a classic in Marvel's Animated Hall of Fame. Reruns of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends continued to air on NBC even after the series ended, but it remained a cherished childhood classic for many. The show really jazzed it up by bringing a whole lineup of Marvel supervillains to the forefront for a new generation of fans. Classic Spider-Man adversaries like the Green Goblin, Electro, Mysterio, Craven the Hunter, and the Kingpin, along with Doctor Doom, Magneto, Loki, and Dracula, appeared on the show. However, it wasn't always gloom and bad guys, you know? The Spider-Friends frequently teamed up with other Marvel heroes like Thor, Sunfire, and the Black Knight. In a notable episode, 7 Little Superheroes, we see Doctor Strange, Captain America, Namor, and Shauna the She-Devil team up to take on the Chameleon. Captain America even made a comeback back in the episode Pawns of the Kingpin. While Tony Stark and Matt Murdock also made guest appearances, their heroic alter egos, Iron Man and Daredevil, made brief cameos. Following his cameo in the episode Spidey Goes Hollywood, NBC gave the Hulk his own animated series. One episode, titled The Quest of the Red Skull, has practically vanished from existence thanks to its not-so-friendly portrayal of Nazis, or them performing their famous Heil Hitler salute, as well as the actual appearance of Hitler and a whole bunch of swastikas, ensuring it never sees the light of day on air or on any streaming platform. Marvel had a firm hand on the creative process, with Stan Lee involved in all stages, from writing and casting to even supervising the animation. This control kept the show authentic to the characters and ultimately helped it outperform the solo Spider-Man series that was airing at the same time, which used the same animation techniques as Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Fans look back on it as one of Marvel's most entertaining and character-rich animated series ever. Episode 1: The Triumph of the Green Goblin. On a stormy New York night, 2 robbers dash through the rain, convinced that the tunnel is their golden ticket to freedom. As one grumbles about how the rain is making it hard to see, Spider-Man stealthily lands on top of their car. The driver, startled to see Spider-Man, swerves the car in a fit of panic and sends Spider-Man flying. However, instead of hitting the gas, the robbers circled back to run him over. Dumb move. But Iceman swoops in and makes an ice loop in front of their car before they can do anything. The car goes through the loop and hits a pole. Spider-Man neatly wraps the robbers in his web while Iceman hands over the stolen jewelry to the 2 police officers. Just then, they realize they're late for a costume party and make a hurried exit. As they take flight, Spider-Man spots a plane soaring through the storm. In the air, Norman Osborn profusely apologizes to his pilot for making him fly in this weather. He's fully convinced that he's totally cured. He's Norman Osborn again and not the creature. However, lightning strikes and the plane crashes. A parachute slows his fall and Norman Osborn lands and hits the floor. When he wakes up disoriented, he's no longer Norman Osborn. He speaks with a different voice, his skin is all green, and his face has a wicked grin. The Goblin roars with laughter as he once again has seized control of Norman Osborn. The Green Goblin has returned, and this time, deadlier than ever. Angelica, Spider-Man, Bobby, and Mona Osborn reach the party. Peter can't quite contain his excitement with all the Spider-Man costumes. However, Angelica quickly brings him back to Earth by pointing out all the supervillains present, including a few Green Goblins hanging from the ceiling. With his spidey sense tingling and sensing something wrong, Peter makes a quiet exit and climbs the lab wall. He catches a glimpse of a flashlight beam through the window and sneaks in. Even before he can react, a green beam strikes him and freezes him. Turns out, the real Green Goblin was in the lab and searching for the formula he was working on before an accidental explosion turned him into the twisted villain. However, the formula was nowhere to be found. When Spider-Man fights to escape, the Goblin tells him not to stress about it as the beam will keep him paralyzed for hours. With a sick smile on his face, Goblin lets Spider-Man in on his plan to use the formula and transform the citizens of New York into horrible monsters just like him. Unable to get his hands on the formula, Goblin decides to kidnap his niece, Mona Osborn, who was a student at the university and must know where the formula was stashed away. Upon hearing Angelica call out to Peter, Green Goblin decides to set the trap. He rigs a liquid nitrogen gun to go off the moment Angelica swings the door open and sneaks out the window. The second she opens the door, the trap freezes her and Spider-Man into ice. Firestar conjures a heat shield to fend off the Goblin's ray, while Spider-Man manages to evade the explosion at the last second, but the shield begins to crack. Spider-Man locks the gun shut with his web as he recovers from his immobility. He informs Firestar that Norman Osborn is once again the Green Goblin and now pursuing Mona. While Bobby and Mona are on a stroll outside, The Goblin swoops down, nabs her, and takes off. Poof. The trio then decides their game plan to take down the Goblin. Spider-Man decides to visit Osborn's former factory, Iceman will inspect his headquarters, and Firestar will visit Mona's house. Spider-Man reaches Osborn's abandoned factory. Although it appears to be desolate, Spider-Man could feel his senses tingling. As Mona cries out to him to spare her life, the Green Goblin heats his formula. The Goblin chuckles, urging her to take just a sip, which would change her exactly like him. He reassures her that after everyone looks like him, no one will really notice. Just as she begs, the alarm blares and Spider-Man arrives. He rescues Mona, convinced he has foiled the Goblin's dastardly plot, but it seems Spider-Man is mistaken. As Spidey races after him, the Goblin flees away on his glider with enough formula to poison millions. Firestar shows up empty-handed from Mona's place, and the Spider friends huddle up, tossing around ideas on where the Goblin could make his next move. After Peter figures out that the Goblin is probably going to poison the city's water supply, they dash to the reservoir, but alas, they're a little too late. The Goblin has already poured the formula into the water. As he faces Spider-Man, the Goblin flies directly into power wires, which results in a massive explosion. Firestar instructs Iceman to freeze the reservoir, and as she melts through the ice, she discovers that the formula has not been mixed with the water. Iceman secures the block of ice to a chopper and retrieves the formula block from the reservoir. Firestar melts it safely down the drain, thus eliminating the threat. In the meantime, Spider-Man rescues a bewildered Norman Osborn from the explosion wreckage, who had no memory of ever becoming the Goblin. Osborn decides to go back to the mental institution and stay there until he's fully cured, this time for good. Episode: The Crime of All Centuries. Peter Parker and Angelica Jones were strolling about when a movie poster for Dinosaur Destroyer caught their eyes. Peter makes a joke about how Craven the Hunter is giving the film a lot of free publicity. It just so happens that Craven is actually touring the Savage Land in search of prehistoric dinosaurs. At that very moment, they see a group of masked men stealing from the theater's cashier. After turning the crooks over to the authorities, the duo flies over the New York skyline as Firestar inquires more about the dinosaurs Craven's after. Spider-Man explains that the Savage Land is a mythical place that Craven discovered. It's filled with extinct species, and that's where Craven was currently hunting dinosaurs. Meanwhile, in the wilds of the Savage Land, Craven and his sidekick Skeleton have caught themselves a pair of prehistoric beasts. While on the hunt for a third, they set the bait and hide in the trees. As the dinosaur approaches, Craven leaps from the branches and uses sleeping gas to knock the beast out. With the third dino in his clutches, Craven admits his true intentions, to attack New York City with an army of vicious, rampaging dinosaurs. But first, he needed the Eye of India Ruby and Firestar, the most powerful heat source on Earth, to fuel his growth energizer, which would hatch dinosaur eggs. Back in the Big Apple, while Firestar and Iceman glided through the air not too far away, Craven and Skeleton were keeping a close eye on them from their truck. Out of nowhere, Skeleton goes off the rails and crashes into a post. As the truck tumbles, a flying dinosaur leaps free of its cage. Spider-Man was correct after all, Firestar thinks. There are actual prehistoric beasts, and one of them is following her. The dinosaur nearly gets to her, but Firestar manages to escape the dinosaur's clutches by channeling her powers and locks the creature back into its cage. Craven approaches her, totally wowed by her talent, and invites them the next day to the museum where he'll present his collection of prehistoric animals. Without giving much thought to it, Firestar agrees. At the museum, Craven shows off his trophies, his captured dinosaurs, to an eager crowd. But when one of the dinosaurs escapes from its cage, the onlookers go into a frenzy. The flying dinosaur crashes Firestar into the wall while the other two jump in. Despite Iceman's and Spider-Man's best efforts, the dinosaur seems to be winning this round. Amidst all the mayhem, Skeleton manages to slip into an adjoining room where the Eye of India Ruby is being guarded by two policemen. The dinosaurs wreak havoc and the cops run away, leaving the room unattended. Taking advantage of the situation, Skeleton steals the ruby. Meanwhile, Firestar sees Craven fleeing and flies after him, with Ms. Lion the dog following after. Craven is busy patting Skeleton on the back for stealing the Eye of India. He intends to use the ruby to construct a laser beam that, when paired with Firestar's fiery energy, will cause dinosaur eggs to hatch and unleash a dino army for him to conquer New York. Firestar overhears Craven's actual motives and realizes how wrong she was in trusting him. Firestar confronts Craven, but before she can even get a word in, he uses freezing spray to knock her unconscious. Craven says his hunt is over as he loads her into the truck and drives off with Skeleton. Ms. Lion runs to Spider-Man and Iceman, who have managed to recage the dinosaurs. It doesn't take long for Peter to figure out that someone intentionally destroyed the cages to create a diversion to steal the ruby. When Ms. Lion shows up barking wildly, Bobby realizes that Ms. Lion wants them to follow her. She finally guides them to a hangar where they discover Firestar in a cage, and just when they think they have it under control, the heroes are rendered unconscious by an electric net. By the time they come to, they're swinging in cages. Craven threatens to electrocute Spider-Man or throw Iceman into a volcano unless Firestar plays nice. With no other choice, Firestar reluctantly agrees. She uses her heat to power the Eye of India and activates the Growth Energizer. The beam hits an egg and a massive Tyrannosaurus Rex hatches from it. The Spider-Friends free themselves from their shackles just as the gigantic beast lets out a roar. Their next challenge is to stop the dinosaur. While Firestar melts the dirt and the dinosaur tumbles into a deep pit, Iceman ices the ground beneath it and the beast slips. Bobby then slaps some icy handcuffs on Skeleton before dropping him and the dinosaur into the watery pit. Craven begs for mercy, his desperation evident. Firestar shrinks the dinosaur to its previous size by reversing the Growth Energizer, and Bobby uses an ice spoon to scoop up the beasts. In the end, all the dinosaurs are securely put onto a plane and are on their way back to the Savage Land where they truly belong. Craven and Skeleton are put behind bars, where they truly belong as well. Episode: The Fantastic Mr. Frump. Everything goes wrong when Dr. Doom acquires the 4 pieces of a long-lost ancient amulet. Combine that with a little magic mumbo-jumbo, it possesses the ability to release a cosmic ray into the heavens and bounce back. Whoever holds the amulet when the ray returns will become the most powerful being in the universe with unparalleled strength. Doom is all set to claim the title for himself when he's interrupted by the Super Friends. Amidst the mayhem, Mr. Frump, a hapless old man and Aunt May's longtime friend, manages to get his hands on the amulet that escaped Doom's clutches. With the amulet in hand, Mr. Frump goes from zero to superhero in no time. Initially, he's just having the time of his life, redecorating New York City with rainbows and bright, cheery hue. Things take a wild turn when he starts calling up historical figures like Genghis Khan, not to mention some of the wackiest creatures you could dream up. As Frump's abilities increase, he can't help but ponder their origin, and so Doom appears in front of him. Doom seizes the chance and uses his manipulation skills to convince Frump that he's the one responsible for the old man's extraordinary abilities. He toys with Frump's confusion, tricks him into thinking the Spider-Friends are out to get him, and sends him off to do his dirty work. When Frump decides to become a superhero and calls himself Wonder Frump, things take a rather bizarre turn. In the mayhem, the Spider-Friends are turned to stone, deprived of their abilities, and compelled to fight against none other than Genghis Khan. As things are falling apart, Dr. Doom decides to change tactics. Why battle the Spider-Friends when you can join forces? He decides to work with the Spider-Friends instead of against them, and they come up with a plan together to fool Mr. Frump. They manage to persuade Frump that if he wants to hold on to his powers forever, he must perform the original ritual again. However, Doom had something else in mind. He hands Frump a phony amulet and keeps the real one for himself, all set to seize the throne of power. However, at the last possible moment, Firestar tosses the real amulet into the cosmic ray, where it's destroyed and everything goes back to normal. Among the show's more eccentric episodes, the Fantastic Mr. Frump sure knows how to keep things lively and fun. Half the thrill is anticipating what wacky wish Frump will come up with next, and it's out and out hilarious. Episode: Sunfire. Genju, the genius Japanese inventor, shows a photograph of Firestar to his nephew Shiro. She catches Shiro's eye right away, but Genju cuts him off before he can continue. It's not her looks that matter, it's her mojo they were after. Genju needed to combine Firestar's strength with Shiro to trigger his fusion reactor. Thinking that his uncle's plan for a reactor was for the greater good, Shiro agrees to convince and bring Firestar to him. Poor naive Shiro. He transforms into Sunfire and leaves to locate Angelica. Now alone with his samurai robots, Genju comes clean. Instead of saving the world, he intended to use their combined abilities to resurrect a fire monster and command the most destructive force on Earth. Shiro stumbles upon Angelica at a carnival and assists her in rescuing Aunt May from a helicopter misadventure. Angelica falls for him and is smitten by his charm, obviously. Meanwhile, Peter and Bobby are suspicious about Shiro's intention. They decide to check out Genju and his nephew for Firestar's sake. They sneak into Genju's lab but are unexpectedly attacked by his robotic samurai army and are knocked out. Unaware of Genju's evil plot, Sunfire begs Firestar to help him complete one last mission and prove his uncle's good intentions for mankind. Trusting him, Firestar consents. Genju is overjoyed. With Spider-Man and Iceman no longer able to hinder his plans, he would soon be able to control Earth's most destructive force thanks to Firestar and Sunfire. Firestar joins Sunfire and Genju in the control room as Genju explains that their combined powers will ignite his reactor, which will then produce limitless energy for the world. But we all know what's actually cooking. Genju isn't rescuing humanity. A robot reports while Angelica catches a glimpse of her friends bound and gagged on a video screen. Ready to leave, Sunfire seizes her arm. She warns him that she's going to explode if he continues, but he insists that she only needs to harness her power. With no other choice, Firestar utilizes her strength to activate the fusion reactor. Firestar questions Sunfire about why he's putting her through this, but before he can answer, Genju's evil plot materializes in the form of a gigantic fire monster that explodes from the fusion reactor. Firestar and Sunfire both plummet to the floor. Shiro pleads with his uncle for his help as the fire monster drains them of their powers. However, Genju merely chuckles maniacally and invites his nephew to join him in conquering humanity. Shiro rejects the offer and Genju commands his robots to confine the two helpless mutants with the rest. With his metal wings, Genju soars out of the structure, with his fire monster trailing behind. He commands his monster to burn the city down, and guess what? It delivers. Spider-Man insists they must take down the monster, but Angelica tells him that the beast has drained Shiro and her of their powers. Peter's convinced that if the reactor doesn't destroy them first, there might be enough energy to restore their powers. Spider-Man and Iceman seize control of the reactor as Sunfire and Firestar enter it. The reactor goes kaboom, freaking Bobby out, but then Angelica and Shiro exit, and it was a success, folks. On the other hand, the fire monster is on a rampage, destroying everything in its path. Sunfire and the Spider Friends arrive on the scene and quickly realize that this will be far more difficult than fighting the robots. As Spider-Man weaves his web, Iceman begins tossing ice pieces at the creature. Genju orders the creature to eliminate Spider-Man and it starts following him. Peter better watch his back. Firestar and Sunfire reach the lake and begin a fast whirl above it, eventually drawing the water into two tornado-like forms. Just as Firestar and Sunfire release their grip, Iceman glides in and turns the water into two enormous pillars of ice. Spider-Man manages to lure the monster between the ice pillars. After Firestar and Sunfire get into position, they melt the pillars. The water douses the monster, its fires are extinguished, and the creature eventually dies. Shiro flies to Genju and takes him away as Genju lets out a desperate cry. Major characters: Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Peter Parker grew up with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, who showered him with love like they were his very own parents. At home, it was all hugs and love, but at school, not so much. Bullies would frequently pick on Peter. After a spider bit Peter's hand, it altered his body chemistry and gifted him with extraordinary powers. Peter's life changed in the blink of an eye. Overjoyed by his new abilities, Peter saw it as an opportunity to earn fame and money, and we all know what comes with sudden fame. Peter became more egotistical and self-centered. One night, while on his way to a TV gig, Peter decided not to intervene with a thief. Tragically, Peter had to pay a heavy price for this. Later that night, that very thief murdered his Uncle Ben during a burglary. Peter, consumed with the shame and the weight of his guilt, gave up on his dream of stardom and vowed to devote his life to fighting crime and never let his abilities be wasted. At an inventors' convention, Peter bumped into Angelica Jones. Totally spellbound by her beauty, he was equally surprised to learn that she was the mutant superhero Firestar. And their buddy Bobby Drake was none other than Iceman. The trio banded together to become the ultimate squad, the Spider Friends. With Dan Gilvezan lending his voice, this Spider-Man, along with his two best friends, was juggling the ups and downs of everyday life, combating supervillains along the way. Bobby Drake / Iceman. Making his first appearance in 1963, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, was once an original member of the X-Men. He was humorous and charming, always ready with a quip or two, but between us, the coolest part about him was his legendary ice slides. Bobby's ability to turn atmospheric moisture into ice first appeared when he was just a baby. He started icing up odd things in the nursery and freezing his bottle. Poor baby had his parents worried. Afraid of how society would react if word got out about their son's mutant skills, Bobby's powers were kept hush-hush. While not much is known about Bobby's early years, he had a stepsister, Aurora Dante, aka Lightwave, who was a mutant just like him. Bobby was shy about showing off his abilities, but when he witnessed a building engulfed in flames and a person trapped inside, that changed everything for him. Bobby didn't even blink before transforming into Iceman, building an ice slide and saving the day. Not long after, Professor Charles Xavier, who oversaw a group of youthful mutants called the X-Men, telepathically recruited Bobby. Bobby, voiced by Frank Welker, was a delightful addition to the team in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Angelica Jones / Firestar. While Iceman was skilled in frigid temperatures, Firestar was all about fire and heat. Not only that, but she could even fly. Like many mutants, Angelica Jones struggled to manage her abilities on her own after discovering them at a young age. So much so that she became known as Miss Angelica Jinx after she accidentally melted a dollhouse in a snowman. But her whole world toppled when she learned she could fly. When a disguised Angelica used her abilities to rescue her father from a falling portion of the building he was working on, she realized she could genuinely help others with her powers. And it was during her senior year in high school when Firestar was born. When the X-Men invited her to join the group, she jumped at the chance. It was there that she met Bobby Drake, who would later become Iceman. Later, at Empire State University, Peter learned that Angelica was Firestar and Bobby was Iceman. After Peter disclosed his secret identity as Spider-Man, the three of them decided to band together to fight crimes. Actually, it was Angelica who came up with the name the Spider Friends. The character of Firestar was specifically created for Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends when the producers were unable to obtain the rights to utilize the Human Torch. Initially tossed around with names like Heatwave, Starblaze, and Firefly, Firestar's alter ego looked a lot like Mary Jane Watson. Too bad MJ herself didn't make the cut for the show. With Kathy Garver lending her voice, Firestar often came off as a tad naive, though considering the time, who could blame her? Sadly, her character occasionally succumbed to the cliche of being naive at times, particularly when it comes to swooning over charming guys. But once she really used her abilities to their greatest potential, she became an indispensable teammate. An absolute game changer for the team, Firestar could generate microwave radiation and could play with fire and heat like nobody's business. The show frequently featured a love triangle involving Spider-Man, Firestar, and Iceman, but ultimately it was Spidey and Firestar who ended up being together. Firestar later became a part of the official Marvel Comics universe due to her immense popularity on the show. Green Goblin. When an unfortunate laboratory explosion changed Norman Osborn's physique and distorted his mind, it not only transformed him physically, it did a real number on him and turned him into the villain we know him as today. Although the explosion gave him some serious, incredible strength, it also unleashed a vicious, sadistic personality that totally overshadowed the real Norman. Voiced by Dennis Marks, the Green Goblin and Spider-Man first faced each other on a Halloween night, when the Goblin brutally defeated Spider-Man and removed his mask, only to find his son Harry's best friend under it. Interestingly, the Green Goblin thought it was only fair to show Peter his real identity, that of Norman Osborn, after all these years. Spider-Man, however, managed to overcome the Green Goblin and temporarily restored his sanity. Norman was back. Norman, now fully aware of the antics he pulled while he was the Green Goblin, was then shipped off to a sanatorium for treatment. In the meantime, Harry, his son, assumed control of his dad's business. Years later, the doctors finally gave Norman a clean nod that he had recovered enough and was free to leave the mental institution, but when he left the facility on a stormy night, his private plane was struck by lightning. He fell, and that fall triggered his dormant goblin personality within him to the surface. And just like that, Spider-Man and the city were once again in danger.
The name is Lightwave, Fire Plug. Remember it.
Lightwave. In the episode The Origin of Iceman, we're introduced to Aurora Dante, aka Lightwave, voiced by Marlene Aragon. Once a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who went rogue after being mind-controlled by another ex-agent, Buzz Mason, Lightwave was Bobby Drake's half-sister, our Iceman. Under Buzz's influence, Lightwave stole a bunch of gadgets to construct a quantum enhancer, which would grant her terrifyingly enhanced powers. With this gadget, she could control the Earth-orbiting Guardstar satellite, a satellite responsible for the coordination of all American defense and communication networks. But it was Buzz who could really pull the strings in the end, as he controlled Lightwave. Equipped with such immense power, Buzz planned not only to control the nation, but the entire world. Dude's got big plans. Iceman, Firestar, and Spider-Man attempted to stop Lightwave, but she was too powerful for them. The situation became worse when Mason, aboard a space vessel, sent Iceman into the great beyond, where he would be stuck and could freeze to death if left out there for too long. In a desperate attempt, Spider-Man reminds Lightwave that her half-brother needed her. He manages to get through to her, and Lightwave breaks free of Buzz's control and saves Iceman. Together, they defeat Mason. However, S.H.I.E.L.D. considered Buzz's role in all of it, and hence, Lightwave's name was cleared. Although she controls light rather than ice, Lightwave is a mutant just like her brother. She can control and direct powerful laser blasts and construct photonic force barriers and create solid beams of light. In fact, she can totally turn her entire body into light and travel through space. The popularity and importance of the show. Can you believe it's been almost 16 years since Iron Man premiered and ushered in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It turned a whole generation into superhero fanatics. Now that WandaVision, Loki, and Hawkeye have joined the superhero mania, it's obvious that the superhero frenzy is here to stay. Although it all started with the comic books, for a lot of us, it was actually the Saturday morning cartoons that dragged us in. And sitting pretty on top of the pile was Spider-Man and his amazing friends. Long before big team-ups like the Avengers were all the rage, this show was crucial in bringing a new generation of fans to Spider-Man. Teaming Spider-Man up with mutants like Iceman and Firestar created a trio that's hard to forget. There's a lot of nostalgia still attached to it, with delightful tales and those iconic Stan Lee intros that never get old. The show is still a fan favorite today. While the animations might not be as hip as today's standards, it was simplistic just like those times. The show ended its run in 1983 after 3 seasons. Despite its success, it was cancelled as the animation business decided to take a different route. Though the show ended, Spider-Man and his amazing friends left a legacy behind that still shapes the superhero scene we see today. Marvelous verdict! Spider-Man and his amazing friends wasn't just Spider-Man doing his web-slinging thing in New York, well, at least a little part of it was, but it was more about friendship, teamwork, and a trio figuring things out together, sometimes a little bit clumsily, but isn't that part of the charm? And for many of us, it was our first taste of the Marvel Universe. Despite the clunky animation, there's an indisputable charm about it, with plots as corny as they get, but hey, we're not complaining. It was worth waking up for on Saturday mornings, and that's the highest compliment we can give it. It was the kind of show that made you want to don a cape and jump off the roof. And tell me, who hasn't attempted to pull off Iceman's slick ice slides or Firestar's blazing flight at least once? I know I did. The show brings back all the fuzzy feelings we had when we were kids. The thrill of adventure, humor, and the belief that when the going gets tough, your pals have got your back. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.